Welcome to Elena, Storyteller, a place where novels, love stories, social psychology, and timeless sayings are retold with deep emotions. Join Elena to listen, empathize, and embark on the emotional journey of today's story.
Open Book, The Path of Redemption. Chiwang 1, The Wound of the Past. The night was quiet in Willow Creek, but inside Ethan Walker's chest, a storm never ceased. For more than 10 years, he had carried the weight of a single night, one reckless decision that had shattered not only a family but also his own soul. Every dawn felt like judgment, every dusk, a reminder that forgiveness was something he might never deserve. Ethan sat by the window of his small apartment in the city, the dim light of the street lamps casting long shadows across the room. A bottle of whiskey stood half empty on the table, but he hadn't touched it tonight. The liquor never washed away the memories. If anything, it sharpened them. The screech of tires on wet asphalt, the sound of breaking glass, and the sudden, terrible silence that followed. He closed his eyes, and once again he saw Michael Harris's face, the boy who had been only 19, full of life, and gone in an instant. Ethan had been 24 then, reckless, celebrating with friends, too stubborn to hand over his car keys. A moment of arrogance, and an entire family's future was stolen. The courts had given him 3 years in prison. But prison was nothing compared to the sentence he carried afterward. The whispers behind his back, the stares that branded him a killer, and worst of all, the knowledge that Michael's parents would never forgive him. When Ethan was released, he left Willow Creek. He wandered from city to city, taking meaningless jobs, never staying long enough to build a life. He thought distance would dull the pain. It didn't. The guilt clung to him like a second skin. Now, at 35, the years of running had left him hollow. He stared at his reflection in the cracked windowpane, the tired eyes, the unshaven jaw, the man who barely resembled the boy who once dreamed of becoming an architect. Dreams turned to dust the night Michael Harris died. A voice inside whispered relentlessly, "Go back." He had ignored it for years, but tonight, something shifted. Maybe it was the silence of the room or the memory of Michael's laughter that suddenly filled his ears. Maybe it was the thought that if he died tomorrow, no one would even notice. Ethan rose, his chair scraping the wooden floor. He opened the drawer and pulled out an old photograph, one he hadn't looked at in years. It showed him and Michael, side by side, laughing at a summer barbecue, before everything, before the darkness. His hands trembled. He knew what he had to do. The next morning, before the sun had fully risen, Ethan packed a small duffel bag. No fanfare, no goodbye. Just a man with nothing left to lose, boarding a bus back to the town that hated him. Back to Willow Creek, where every street corner would remind him of his crime, and every face might turn away in disgust. As the bus pulled out of the station, Ethan pressed his forehead to the glass. Fields rolled by in endless green, but his thoughts were fixed on the Harrises, the family whose lives he had torn apart. Would they spit in his face, slam the door shut, or would they simply look through him as though he were already dead? He did not know. But for the first time in years, Ethan felt a spark of purpose. The road ahead was long, perhaps impossible, yet it was the only road left to him. The bus rumbled on, carrying him toward the place where his story had ended, and perhaps where it might begin again. Chiwang 2 returned to Willow Creek. The bus slowed as it rolled into Willow Creek, the small southern town Ethan had once called home. From the window, he could see the familiar landscape unfolding. Rows of oak trees draped in Spanish moss, the worn brick buildings that lined Main Street, the old water tower that still bore the town's name in fading white paint. Time had brushed its hand across the town, but it hadn't erased the bones of the place. Ethan's heart tightened. For 10 years, he had seen this town only in dreams and nightmares. Now it was here, real again, and every sight carried the weight of memory. The bus hissed to a stop. Ethan stood, duffel bag slung over his shoulder, and stepped down onto the cracked pavement. The air was thick with the scent of pine and earth after a night's rain. For a moment, he simply stood there, staring down the street where he had once raced his bicycle as a boy. A place that had once felt like the whole world. Now it felt like hostile ground. a woman carrying groceries passed by. Her eyes met his, and in an instant, recognition flared. The plastic bag slipped slightly in her grip as her face hardened. Without a word, she turned and hurried away. Ethan lowered his gaze, shame burning hot in his chest. He walked down Main Street, each step echoing louder than it should have. Shopkeepers leaned in their doorways, conversations falling silent as they noticed him. Mr. Donovan, the barber, paused mid-snip, scissors hovering in the air. Mrs. Kelly, who ran the bakery, froze with a tray of bread in her hands. "Is that?" someone whispered. "Walker, Ethan Walker." Thought he'd never come back. The murmurs followed him like shadows. He didn't lift his head. He had expected this, but expectation didn't soften the sting. At the corner, he stopped before an old diner, the one he and his friends had haunted in their teenage years. Through the glass, he saw familiar faces, older now but unmistakable. A man named Carl, once his closest friend, sat at the counter. Their eyes met. For a brief second, Ethan thought he saw something flicker, surprise, maybe even pity. But then Carl's jaw tightened, and he turned back to his coffee. Ethan exhaled slowly. He had lost more than time in those years away. He had lost every bond, every trust. He made his way toward the outskirts of town, to the small motel that still stood by the highway. The neon sign buzzed faintly, its letters half burned out. He checked in under his own name. There was no point hiding. That night, as he lay on the creaking bed, the ceiling fan spinning slowly above him, Ethan stared at the shadows crawling across the walls. He knew tomorrow would be harder. Tomorrow, he would go to the Harris family. And he would face the people whose lives... 3 closed doors. The next morning, the sky above Willow Creek was heavy with gray clouds, as though the town itself was bracing for something unpleasant. Ethan sat at the small motel desk, staring at the address scribbled on a crumpled piece of paper. He didn't need it. He knew exactly where the Harrises lived. He had known it since he was a boy. The Harris house sat at the end of Willow Lane, a narrow road lined with tall pecan trees. Ethan remembered riding past it countless times, waving at Michael, who would be tossing a football in the yard. Those memories cut deeper now, sharp as glass. As he walked, his feet felt heavier with each step, as though the ground itself wanted to keep him away. The closer he came, the louder his heartbeat grew, thudding in his chest like the echo of a judge's gavel. The house appeared at the end of the lane, a modest, white 2-story home with blue shutters, paint peeling slightly with age. The flower beds that Mrs. Harris had once kept so carefully tended were overrun with weeds. The sight pierced him. Grief had drained the life from this place, just as it had from its owners. Ethan stopped at the gate. His hands trembled. He whispered to himself, "This is it, no turning back." He pushed the gate open, its rusty hinges creaking, and walked up the short path to the door. He raised his hand, knocked once, then again. For a long moment, there was silence, then footsteps. The door opened a crack, and Helen Harris appeared. Time had carved deep lines into her face, but her eyes were the same, sharp, blue, and filled with a grief that had never faded. The moment she saw him, her expression hardened. "You." Ethan swallowed. His throat was dry as sand. "Mrs. Harris, it's me, Ethan Walker." "I know who you are." Her voice was cold, clipped like a blade. She began to close the door, but Ethan quickly pressed his palm against it, not forcing, just pleading. "Please, just a moment. I've carried this for years. I had to come back. I had to say." "You had to say what?" Her voice rose, trembling with fury. "That you're sorry, that it was a mistake. My son is in the ground, Mr. Walker. Your words don't bring him back." Ethan lowered his gaze, shame burning through him. "I know, I can't undo what I did. I just wanted you to hear it from me. I'm sorry, truly." From deeper in the house, another voice called. Richard Harris, Michael's father, appeared in the doorway behind his wife. His shoulders were stooped, his once strong frame now thin. But his eyes were burning coals. "What the hell is he doing here?" Richard's voice shook the air. Helen turned slightly. "He says he wants to apologize." "Apologize?" Richard stepped forward until his face was inches from Ethan. "You think you can walk up to my house, 10 years late and wash the blood off your hands with words. You killed my boy. You don't get to be forgiven. Ethan didn't move, didn't defend himself. He stood there, absorbing every word like the lashes of a whip. "I'll say this once, Walker," Richard growled. "You're not welcome here. You're not welcome in this town. If you had any decency left, you'd leave and never come back." Ethan opened his mouth, but no words came. His chest ached with the weight of everything he could never say, everything they would never accept. The door slammed shut. He stood on the porch for a long time, staring at the peeling paint, hearing the echo of Michael's laughter in his memory. Then, finally, he turned and walked back down the path, the weeds brushing against his legs. Behind him, the house loomed silent, its windows like eyes that would never stop judging him. For Ethan, the doors were closed, and maybe, he thought bitterly, they always would be. 4. Seed of Hope. The days after his visit to the Harris house were some of the loneliest Ethan had ever known. The motel rooms smelled of dust and mildew, its thin curtains letting in too much light during the day and too much noise at night. He could hardly sleep. Whenever he closed his eyes, he saw Helen's face twisted in grief, Richard's eyes blazing with hatred, and the door slamming in his face. Every instinct told him to leave. He had done what he came to do, offered an apology, even if it had been torn to shreds and thrown back at him. He could disappear again, vanish into another nameless city, and let the town forget his presence once more. But something in him resisted. Perhaps it was stubbornness. Perhaps it was that tiny, dying ember inside his chest that whispered, "Stay, prove you've changed." So he stayed. Ethan began wandering the streets of Willow Creek, keeping his head down, hands shoved deep into his pockets. People avoided him, their conversations falling silent as he passed. Old friends turned their backs, some muttered curses under their breath. The children had been warned not to speak to him. Mothers pulled them closer whenever he walked by. And yet, amid the cold shoulders and whispered scorn, Ethan noticed the things others ignored. The broken fence outside Mrs. Kelly's bakery. The potholes on Pine Street that no one had bothered to fill. The trash piling up along the creek's edge. One morning, he rose before dawn, walked to the bakery, and began mending the broken fence with a hammer and nails he bought at the hardware store. He worked silently, sweat dripping down his back as the sun rose. When Mrs. Kelly arrived, she froze on the sidewalk, clutching her keys. "What do you think you're doing?" she asked sharply. "Fixing it," Ethan said simply, without looking up. "It should have been done a long time ago." She didn't thank him. She didn't even stay to watch. She just went inside and locked the door. But the next day, he returned to patch the potholes with gravel. The day after, he hauled bags of garbage out of the creek. He spoke to no one, asked for nothing. He just worked, as though each act of labor might chip away at the stone walls that had risen between him and the town. And yet, no matter how much he did, no one's eyes softened. If anything, suspicion grew. Why is he doing this? What does he want? The questions hung in the air, unspoken but heavy. It was during one of these silent labors, clearing weeds from the overgrown playground at Willow Creek Elementary, that he first noticed her. A little girl stood at the edge of the swings, her hands gripping the rusty chains. She couldn't have been more than 9 or 10. Her hair was the same chestnut brown as Michael Harris's had been, and her eyes carried that same sharp blue as Helen. Ethan's chest tightened instantly. He knew who she was before she even spoke. "Why are you doing that?" the girl asked, her voice curious, not accusing. Ethan wiped the sweat from his forehead, straightened and looked at her. "Doing what?" "Cleaning this place," she tilted her head. "Nobody else cares, why do you?" Ethan hesitated. The truth that he was trying to bury his guilt with good deeds wasn't something a child should have to hear. Instead, he said softly, "Because it should be nice for kids like you." She studied him, her brows furrowed in thought. "You're Ethan Walker, aren't you?" The words hit him like a stone. He expected the bitterness, the disgust, the fear. But none of those things showed on her face, only curiosity. "Yes," he admitted, voice rough. "That's me." The girl didn't run. She didn't glare. Instead, she nodded slowly, as though she had just confirmed a rumor. My name is Lily, she said after a pause. Lily Harris. Ethan's breath caught. His hands went numb. He gripped the handle of the rake to steady himself. Harris, he repeated, though he already knew. She nodded again, calm, unflinching. Michael was my brother. The world seemed to tilt beneath him. Here she was, a living reminder of the life he had stolen, the family he had shattered. His first instinct was to step back, to flee before she could look at him with the same fire her parents had. But Lily didn't glare. She looked at him with clear, searching eyes, the kind of eyes that hadn't yet learned how to carry hate. You don't look like a monster, she said quietly. The words nearly broke him. Ethan dropped his gaze, voice shaking. That's because you can't see inside. Lily tilted her head again, as though weighing his answer. Then, to his surprise, she walked over and set the swing in motion with a push of her foot. Well, if you keep fixing things, maybe people will stop seeing the monster. Maybe they'll see something else. Ethan couldn't speak. He could only watch her, the sunlight catching in her hair, the swing creaking as she moved back and forth. For the first time since returning, he felt something stir inside him. Not forgiveness. He didn't dare hope for that. But something smaller, fragile, and infinitely precious. 5. Struggles in the shadows. The night after meeting Lily, Ethan lay awake in his motel bed, staring at the water-stained ceiling. Her words echoed endlessly in his head. You don't look like a monster. Maybe they'll see something else. No one had spoken to him like that in years. Not with such innocence, not with such absence of hatred. It terrified him as much as it comforted him. Because if a child could see him as something other than a monster, then maybe he wasn't beyond saving. But guilt fought back with brutal force. Every time he remembered Lily's smile, Michael's face appeared beside it, lifeless, frozen in memory. The boy he had taken from this world would never swing again, never laugh again. And here he was, daring to hope because of Michael's little sister. The irony twisted like a knife. The following days tested him. Whispers grew louder as more townsfolk noticed Ethan's silent labors. At the hardware store, he overheard someone muttering, "What's he playing at? Trying to look good for the papers." At the diner, a man spat in his direction and sneered, "We don't need your kind here, Walker. Crawl back to whatever hole you came from." Every insult burned, but he endured it. He worked harder longer. If he was repairing a fence, he repaired 3. If he was clearing trash, he cleared every last piece until his back screamed in pain. He refused to answer their scorn with anger. For the first time in his life, he understood that anger was a luxury he could no longer afford. Yet doubt remained. At night, exhaustion pulled him towards sleep, but shadows always returned. Shadows whispering that his effort was useless. They will never forgive you. You're only fooling yourself. Leave while you can. Each time, it was Lily's face that silenced those whispers. They began to cross paths more often. Sometimes she appeared at the playground, other times near the creek where he worked. She didn't always speak. Sometimes she just watched quietly, sitting on the swing or crouching by the water. One afternoon, as Ethan repaired the wooden bridge leading into town, Lily approached carrying a small paper bag. "I brought you something," she said, holding it out. Inside was a sandwich, wrapped in foil, and a bottle of lemonade. Ethan froze. "Did your mother?" "She doesn't know," Lily interrupted quickly. "If she did, she'd be really mad." Ethan's throat tightened. He tried to hand it back. "I can't." But Lily shook her head stubbornly. "You look tired. You should eat." For a long moment, Ethan simply stared at the bag in his hands. It was the first act of kindness anyone had shown him since his release. He felt the weight of it far beyond its meager size. "Thank you," he said, his voice almost breaking. Lily smiled. "If you keep helping the town, maybe one day they'll say thank you too." But not everyone saw her innocence as a blessing. A week later, Richard Harris caught sight of his daughter speaking to Ethan outside the schoolyard. His fury erupted like a storm. He grabbed Lily by the arm, pulling her away, and rounded on Ethan with eyes burning hotter than fire. "Stay away from her," Richard roared. "You've already taken one child from me. You won't touch the other." The whole street froze. Onlookers gathered, whispering, some nodding in agreement, others watching with unease. Ethan raised his hands slowly, palms open, voice trembling. "I never meant." "Don't you dare speak." Richard's voice cracked with rage and grief. He pulled Lily behind him, shielding her. "If I see you near my daughter again, I swear I won't wait for the law. Do you understand?" The threat hung heavy in the air. Ethan nodded once, silently, unable to meet Richard's gaze. He stepped back, retreating without a word. That night back at the motel, Ethan broke. He sat hunched on the floor, hands gripping his hair, tears streaming freely. "What am I doing?" he whispered into the dark. "Maybe they're right. Maybe I'll always be a monster." But then he remembered Lily's voice, steady and clear. Maybe they'll see something else. And despite everything, the anger, the hatred, the pain, he clung to those words as if they were a lifeline. Because for a man drowning in shadows, even the smallest light was enough. 6. Crossroads of Redemption. Autumn descended on Willow Creek with a restless wind. The pecan trees along Willow Lane shed their leaves, covering the sidewalks in gold and rust. The chill in the air seemed to sharpen every whisper, every glance directed at Ethan Walker as he moved through the town. He had been back for nearly 2 months now. He worked quietly, kept to himself, endured the insults, but the town's suspicion never softened. Until the fire. It happened on a Friday evening. The old redwood barn, standing on the outskirts of town, caught fire. No one knew how it started. Some said a lantern had been left burning. Others whispered about teenagers sneaking inside. But the flames spread quickly, lighting up the night sky. Ethan had been walking back to the motel after a long day repairing the bridge when he smelled the smoke. His eyes lifted and his chest tightened. The barn wasn't empty. He knew that building. Sometimes children played there despite warnings, and animals from nearby farms often wandered inside. Without thinking, Ethan broke into a run. By the time he reached the barn, a small crowd had gathered, shouting and panicking. Flames roared through the roof, sparks shooting into the air. The heat was suffocating. Ethan's eyes darted wildly until he spotted them. 2 boys, no older than 12, trapped near the back, their silhouettes flickering in the orange glow. "They're inside," someone screamed. But no one moved. Fear froze them in place. Ethan didn't hesitate. He yanked off his jacket, wrapped it around his arm, and charged through the doorway, coughing as smoke seared his lungs. The fire crackled and spat, but he pushed forward, the heat blistering his skin. The boys were huddled together, eyes wide with terror. "Come on," Ethan shouted hoarsely, grabbing them by the shoulders. "Stay low, keep your heads down." He guided them toward the door, shielding them with his body as beams groaned and fell around them. At one point, a burning plank collapsed, blocking their way. Ethan kicked it aside, pain shooting up his leg, but he didn't stop. When they finally burst out into the night air, the crowd erupted in gasps. The boys collapsed onto the grass, coughing but alive. Ethan staggered out after them, his face blackened with soot, his arms scorched and bleeding. For a moment, silence fell. The people of Willow Creek stared, not with hatred, not with suspicion, but with something new. Shock, awe, and something like doubt in their own certainty. But the silence didn't last. From the edge of the crowd, Richard Harris appeared, his face pale with fury. He pushed past the onlookers and stood before Ethan, his voice trembling. "Don't you dare think this changes anything." Ethan, still gasping for breath, met his eyes. For once, he didn't look away. "I wasn't trying to prove anything," Ethan rasped. "They were children. I couldn't stand by." Richard's fists clenched. The crowd watched, holding their breath. "Children," Richard repeated bitterly. His voice cracked, and for a fleeting second, his grief overwhelmed his anger. He turned away, pulling his coat tighter, as though shielding himself from the sight of the man he hated most. Helen Harris was there too, her face pale in the firelight. She said nothing, but her eyes lingered on Ethan longer than before. Not soft, not forgiving, but not entirely closed either. In the days that followed, the story spread quickly. "Ethan Walker saved them," people whispered at the diner, in the store, at church. Some still muttered that it was nothing but guilt driving him. Others admitted quietly, maybe he's not the same boy he was. For the first time, the wall around him began to crack. The two boys he saved, Tommy and Jake, left a note outside his motel room. "Thank you, Mr. Walker, you're our hero." The words broke him in ways he hadn't expected. He cried silently, clutching the note like it was a gift he didn't deserve. But redemption was never simple. The sheriff, Daniel Moore, visited Ethan one evening. He was an old friend of Richard's, a man who had never trusted Ethan. "You did a brave thing," the sheriff said, leaning against the doorframe. "But don't mistake it for forgiveness. This town has a long memory, and Richard, he'll never let go of what happened, not when it's his son in the ground." Ethan nodded slowly. "I don't expect forgiveness, not anymore. All I want is to live in a way that honors what I took." The sheriff studied him for a long moment. Then, without another word, he tipped his hat and left. And yet, not everyone was ready to accept even this fragile shift. 2 nights later, someone smashed the window of Ethan's motel room. A rock clattered across the floor, wrapped in a note scrawled with rage. "Leave, murderer, or next time it won't be a rock." Ethan stood in the broken glass, heart pounding, the weight of both hatred and hope pressing down on him. He realized the truth. Redemption wasn't a straight path. It was a battlefield, one he would have to walk every day of his life. And now, as the wind howled through the broken window, Ethan understood something he hadn't before. Saving lives was not enough. He would have to risk everything. His safety, his peace, even his fragile connection to Lily, if he truly wanted to change the story written about him. 7. The final reckoning. Winter settled over Willow Creek with a cruel stillness. Snow fell softly on rooftops, muffling the world in white silence. But inside Ethan's chest, storms raged louder than ever. The broken window at the motel was only the beginning. Over the next weeks, hostility sharpened. Doors slammed when he passed. Someone painted the word killer across the bridge he had repaired. Each morning he scrubbed it away. Each evening it reappeared. And yet he stayed. He worked. He endured. Because something deep inside whispered that leaving now would mean surrendering everything he had tried to build. A boiling point. The breaking point came on a bitter January evening. Lily had gone missing. Word spread quickly. Helen Harris had gone to call her daughter for supper, but Lily was nowhere to be found. The whole town erupted in panic. Search parties scattered into the woods, lanterns swinging, voices calling her name through the snow. Ethan heard the news at the diner. His blood turned to ice. He dropped everything and ran. The sheriff organized the search, but suspicion brewed fast. "Where, Walker?" someone shouted. "Has anyone seen him? That girl's been talking to him for weeks." Murmurs turned to accusations. Maybe he took her. Maybe he finally showed his true colors. Richard Harris's face twisted with rage and terror. "If he touched my daughter," his voice cracked into something raw, something barely human. But Ethan wasn't hiding. He was already deep in the woods, calling Lily's name until his throat tore. Snow lashed against his face, his breath turning to steam. Each step through the frozen earth was agony, but he didn't stop. Not again, not another child, not her. Into the fire again. Hours passed, the forest grew darker. Then, faintly through the wind, he heard it. A cry. He sprinted, branches clawing his skin until he saw her. Lily, trapped at the bottom of a small ravine, her leg twisted beneath a fallen log. She was shivering, sobbing, unable to climb out. "Lily," Ethan dropped to his knees at the edge. "I'm here, hold on." Her eyes widened, tears streaking her face. "Ethan." He slid down, pain shooting through his shoulder as he landed. The log was heavy, but desperation lent him strength. With a guttural cry, he heaved it off her leg, then lifted her into his arms. "We're getting out," he whispered, though his body screamed with exhaustion. Step by step, he clawed his way up the ravine, snow biting into his skin, until at last he reached the ridge. The search party burst into view, lanterns flaring. Relief spread like wildfire until they saw who carried her. The trial in the snow. Ethan staggered forward, Lily cradled against him. He laid her gently in Helen's arms. Helen collapsed to her knees, sobbing, clutching her daughter. But Richard's eyes fixed on Ethan. Not gratitude, not relief, fury. "You," Richard's voice thundered. "Where was she? What did you do to her?" "She fell," Ethan said hoarsely. "She was trapped. I found her." "You expect me to believe that?" Richard advanced, fists clenched, trembling with rage. "You've been poisoning her mind for weeks, and now this." The crowd shifted uneasily. Some glared at Ethan, others looked away, torn. The sheriff stepped forward, but Richard shoved past him. "Say one more word," Richard hissed, "and I'll bury you myself the way you buried my boy." The world seemed to freeze. Ethan could feel the weight of every eye on him. He could run. He could fight. But instead, he dropped to his knees in the snow. "I won't defend myself," Ethan said quietly, voice breaking. "I don't deserve forgiveness. Not from you. Not from anyone. But I swear on everything I have left, if I could trade places with Michael, I would. Every day I live with what I did. I saved Lily because I couldn't bear to let another Harris child suffer because of me." Snow swirled in the silence that followed. Richard's chest heaved, his hands shaking. He wanted to strike, to punish, but Helen's voice broke the night. "Richard." She clutched Lily, eyes shining with tears, looking at Ethan with something different. Pain, bitterness, but also truth. He brought her back. A choice made. The sheriff placed a firm hand on Richard's shoulder. "He did, Richard. He saved her life. That doesn't erase the past, but it's the truth." For the first time, Richard faltered. His eyes flickered to Lily, safe in her mother's arms, then back to Ethan kneeling in the snow, broken and waiting. The hatred didn't vanish. It never could. But Richard turned away, his shoulders collapsing under the weight of grief too heavy to carry. "Get him out of my sight," he muttered, "before I do something I can't take back." Ethan bowed his head. He didn't expect more. He didn't deserve more. But as the townsfolk led Lily home, her small voice called out through the cold night. "Thank you, Ethan." The words pierced through the snow, through the silence, through the years of hatred and guilt. He closed his eyes, letting the tears finally fall. Epilogue: A different dawn. Months later, spring returned to Willow Creek. The bridge stood strong, the barn had been rebuilt, and the whispers in the diner had softened into quieter tones. Some still hated him. Some never would forgive. But others began to nod when they saw him, a silent acknowledgement that the man who had returned was not the boy who had left. Ethan never asked for redemption. He knew it wasn't his to claim. But in Lily's smile, in the slow, cautious shifts of a community learning to see him not as a monster, but as a man, he found something close enough. Not forgiveness, but a chance to keep walking. And sometimes, that was all redemption truly was. Echoes of the past. 20 years had passed since that winter night in Willow Creek. The town had changed, new shops stood on Main Street, the old pecan trees had grown taller, and the once rusty bridge now gleamed with sturdy timbers, weathered but unbroken. Children played there in the afternoons, their laughter carried on the breeze. Few of them knew who had built it, who had bled into its wood and stone. Lily Harris, no longer a child, but a woman now in her 30s, stood by that bridge, her daughter's small hand in hers. The spring air was warm, carrying the scent of blooming magnolias. "Mommy," her daughter asked, tugging at her sleeve, "who fixed this bridge? My teacher said it's been here forever." Lily smiled softly, her gaze drifting across the wood, her heart tightening with memory. She could still see him, tall, weary, his hands scarred but steady, hammering each nail as though his life depended on it. "A man named Ethan," she said quietly. "Was he a builder?" Lily hesitated. How could she explain? How could she wrap a lifetime of pain, mistakes, and redemption into words a child could understand? "He was someone who made a terrible mistake," Lily finally said. "But he spent the rest of his life trying to make it right." Her daughter's brow furrowed. Did people forgive him? Lily looked at the flowing creek below, remembering her father's rage, her mother's tears, the townsfolk's whispers. Remembering Ethan's eyes that night in the snow, eyes filled with both sorrow and a strange, fragile hope. "Not everyone," she said softly. "Maybe not even most, but forgiveness isn't something you can force. Sometimes all you can do is keep trying every day until the end." Her daughter thought about this, then nodded as though she understood more than a child should. They walked on, but Lily lingered for a moment longer, her hand brushing against the bridge's wooden rail. She thought of the man who had carried her from the ravine, who had given her back her life when he could have walked away. She thought of Ethan Walker. No statue marked his name. No plaque honored his deeds. For many in Willow Creek, he was still nothing more than a ghost of a tragedy. But for Lily, he was something else. A reminder that even the most broken lives could still hold light. As the sun dipped lower, painting the water gold, Lily whispered into the quiet air, "Thank you, Ethan. I never forgot." And with that, she took her daughter's hand and crossed the bridge, the same bridge he had left behind, strong enough to carry them both into a different future.
Thank you so much for watching until the end. Don't forget to subscribe to support Elena, storyteller, and stay tuned for the next heartfelt video.